Medicine,
Law, friendship. This is Dr. Long and lawyer Nik. You're listening to the Medico-Legal Brief.
one doctor, one lawyer, and a whole lot of gray area.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Today on the Medico-Legal Brief, we are going to go ahead and start talking about PTO, vacation time, all the fun stuff that lends itself to quality of life when you're working a career. So, Long, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Good. I think this is a really good topic just because obviously work-life balance is such a big priority nowadays for
Yep.
our generation and the generations after us. So I think this is going to be a really good discussion.
You know, I think that when individuals, students are coming out and getting into the workforce, they're always looking at the salary, right? It's always, what's the salary? What am I going to get paid? How does that work? But a lot of the times they overlook benefits, and the PTO is part of that benefits package. And
Hmm.
when we were having the employment contract conversation, it had came up that you also had the ability to like negotiate your pay time off and how you plan your vacation, so on and so forth. So I think it's a pretty good topic to discuss because everybody just thinks about like, how do I do the work? What needs to be done to accomplish the work that's put before me? But you're not also considering, okay, what do my weekends look like? What do my holidays look like? What do my vacations look like? So to start it off, I feel like there's a lot of differences between the two professions as far as vacation time goes. So for a doctor, what does vacation time look like? How does that work?
Yeah, so we are allotted, so per your contract, you're allotted a certain amount of days per year, and you can negotiate that up or down depending on what you want. But the standard is typically 4 weeks minimum. So that would be, depending on if you work a 4-day work week or a 5-day, but it's 4 weeks total. But that not only includes, or that includes only PTO and vacation, sick time. However, for physicians, you also get an additional 1 week for CME. So that's going to be continuing medical education. So it's kind of a nice little additional week of time off, essentially, because what you can do is you can choose a conference or a location that you want to go travel to and take your family with. And it's just essentially half of it is paid on the company's.
Is there any restriction to how you spend it? So if you're paying for a hotel room for your whole family, do they have to like prorate it or anything?
No, so hotel room, it would be, I mean, obviously, if you're getting a suite, then they'll pay for the suite. But when it comes down to like flights, food, then yes, it has to be individualized out to just the person, so just the physician. But again,
So
grand scheme
essentially,
of things, still
yeah.
covering a good portion of it.
So essentially, you're getting possibly 5 weeks of vacation every year.
Pretty much. Yep. And that's the standard, but then you can, of course, negotiate more. But in the physician or medical world, the issue with the PTO is when you are not working, you're not making money, right? So we've talked about it in the past in other podcasts about how physicians' salaries are really dependent on how many patients they see, the sort of work that they do. So the time that you take off will reflect in your annual income. So if you end up taking 2 to 3 months off, say for paternity leave, then you would have to expect that your income will be a lot lower.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
actually very eye-opening. So there's no set salary for if you want to take paternity or maternity. Not like some
Correct.
corporate worlds where it's, you have 8 weeks of paid time off or 6 weeks of paid time off.
Right. So some places will honor kind of, okay, these last 2 years, this was your average income. They will still continue to pay you out for it, but it may not be for the full, however months that company allows. Some companies only allow 4 to 6 weeks of maternity. Some allow 3 months. It's very different depending on who you work for.
Very
So
interesting.
again, all things that you want to negotiate and talk about and make sure you understand what you're signing up for. But I imagine that's very similar to being an attorney and lawyer, right?
So that is something that, at least from my own experience, is kind of a unique thought because depending on where you're at, and if I speak out of place, I apologize, but depending on where you're at, those kind of rules and laws will dictate what happens, right? So you might be an attorney and you might work for the government as maybe a prosecutor, and in that case, you might get federal holidays off. You might have more stable PTO as far as like what the government requires. And again, you have state government and federal government depending on which one you're working for. You could also be legal counsel, in-house counsel at a corporation. So I worked for an aerospace and defense company. I wasn't in their legal department, but with what I did, I had the typical, hey, you have these days off, you have this amount of PTO, you're allotted this amount of sick time, and it was very, very corporate. So if you were to go into the legal world in a corporate manner, you would be at the beck and call of the corporate standards of what all the employees have.
Sure.
Where I came out in a very small firm. You know, in the firm that when I arrived, it was one owner, and then we had one office manager, and there was a variety of interns that came from the law school. So I was her first associate attorney. And what I found out really fast was that when it's your firm and it's your own shingle, you don't get paid if you're not working. So the owner, the my managing attorney, she was very, very dedicated to the firm to where we had to try to convince her to take time off because it was her firm. If she was going to put food on the table for her family, as well as pay me a salary and pay the office manager a salary and make sure the interns were getting the experience that they needed, she had to make sure that she was keeping the lights on. And
Mhm.
that was very, very eye-opening to me because it kind of flowed down to me as an associate attorney where if I wanted time off, I had to take all those things into consideration. You know, she's not taking days off, she's working sometimes even Saturday and Sunday. You try to match that so then you can be seen as a good worker. You know, that individual hired you and you want to show, hey, you're going to get your worth out of me. So it was very, very unique. And then obviously with the court system, and this is a question I want to ask you, but I'll start with court system. As a litigation attorney, you're planning your, let's say, court docket so far out. So depending, I think at the time we had around 80 to 90 clients on our books. So every single one of those clients had something scheduled, whether it be a client consult, a mediation, maybe they had a court hearing, maybe they had a final trial or a deposition. So you had all these things on the books, and if you or your office manager didn't manage that well, before you know it, after a few months, you look at your calendar, you say, wow, I am completely booked up for the next 3 or 4 months. I can't even take a day off. To where you would have maybe a client consultation on a federal holiday, or maybe on Christmas Eve or on New Year's Eve, because that was the only time you could fit that in for the day. So it was very unique in that sense because a judge, you know, there's some judges out there that care, but a judge's court docket is super, super important. And so to keep the court system and the judicial system moving, they want to make sure that when you book, you're going to show up and all the parties are going to show up. And they get really, really upset if you're trying to move things without good cause or if you're late to hearings. So you have to be very, very strategic about how you plan it. And there's also the notion of being called into court randomly at random times because maybe opposing counsel decided that today they need to file something and you need to be there to argue. So there's a little bit of paranoia there of like, okay, is today the day that I get called into court? So vacation time was something that was looked at as like, you know, a big luxury. And again, that's at a smaller firm.
So what's the amount of time you get off per year?
Oh
Is
God.
there a standard or is it just different across
It
the board?
it depends again, and that's the legal response for everything. It depends, right?
Mhm.
So I have some friends that work in big law, and on another podcast, we talked about billables, right? There's so many hours that need to be billed per your contract or your agreement or the standard for the firm that sometimes you're not even getting vacation time because you're trying to meet those billables. At a small firm where the owner is, you know, she manages everything and manages time and all that, it was me coming to her saying, hey, I have this. Is there a possibility that I can take time off? It was very come and go. You know, if I had an event or I want to go out of town, I had to really sit down and have that discussion. There was no limitation, right? Because obviously it's her own firm. She can make the call, but she also on her end has to be very aware of, okay, well, I'm paying this associate attorney a salary. He is supposed to be getting billable hours for the work that he's doing for our clients. If he's not here, then either A, he's not being able to bill out, B, he's not being able to learn because he's shadowing me on certain things that are super important, or C, I don't have that backup individual when I get double booked to take on another hearing or take on a client consult when I got to run the court. So it was very, I mean, I probably worked the longest amount of hours and days at that firm, which ultimately led me to recognize my standard of living, my quality of life, work-life balance, right? Where I ended up deciding to leave the firm. I mean, I'd be remiss to say that that didn't play a part in it. But coming in again, you're excited, you just got licensed, you're ready to go. You kind of don't think about that stuff till you realize that you're exhausted and you're tired and you haven't had a formal day off other than the weekends in, 3 or 4 months. You start thinking, okay, how sustainable is this over the long period of time?
Right, right. Oh, I hear you on that. Similarly, when I first got out, pretty standard, like I said, 30 days, 4 weeks, is the typical starting PTO, and it's something that you get right away. So, for us, because we are taking care of patients and because we have colleagues that we work with, it's always recommended that you give those dates out as far advanced as you can. I
Mhm.
personally try to give it out between 6 to 12 months ahead of time, but sometimes there are last minute things. Yeah, sometimes there are last minute things that come up, and then there are also a lot of docs that are procrastinators as well. Just because they've attained this high degree doesn't necessarily mean that they're always on top of things. So sometimes they may not give their notice or the time that they need to take off for 4 or 6 weeks ahead of time. And it does throw a little wrench into everyone's schedule because it's not only the physician's schedule that they have to take care of and manage, but it's the patient schedules, right? How many patients are already scheduled on that day? Do they have to be rescheduled, moved? And then staffing. Do you already have a medical assistant working that day for you? Do you have a nurse that's supposed to be helping that day? Are they still needed if you're not going to be in the office? So there's a lot of other logistics, and it's not just the physician's schedule. So when you work for a big company, they usually have stipulations like, hey, you need to give notice by this amount of time so that we can schedule accordingly. But again, life happens, and families with kids, sick parents, those things can show up, and they don't usually ever cause too much of an issue because they understand that those emergencies pop up. So I don't feel like I've ever had any issue needing to take last minute PTO, but I try to avoid it. But I will say my first year, last year when I started, by the end of November, December, I had like 6 PTO days left that I hadn't used. So I just took random half days,
Yeah.
or I had like a pickleball tournament. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just take the day off and go play that tournament on a Friday instead of not playing it at all. So again, leniency here and there, but overall, the idea is that you want to make sure you try to plan ahead to help your patients as well as help your colleagues.
So how do you do that planning a year in advance, And when you are single and you don't have a family, you think, okay, I don't know what's going to happen in a year. But when you have a family, you have a spouse, you have kids, how do you deal with that?
I think it because you have kids and because you have a spouse, it's easier to plan out ahead, right? Because you know whether your kids are going to need to be in daycare, are they going to be in school, are they going to be in summer camp? They will have their own schedule, and so you end up planning vacation time around their schedule. So you're already limiting your year to a certain amount of, is it going to be springtime, summertime, wintertime? And then other limitations may be prices. Maybe you don't want to be traveling during the holidays, or do you want to travel during the kids' time off, like their spring breaks, fall breaks, winter breaks? Like it does kind of revolve around the kids once you have kids. If you're simply just married, sometimes it's revolved around your spouse's schedule. So my partner does not have as many PTO days, and there are limitations on when they can take PTO. And so I plan around those things. And so we have that discussion. So for 2026, we'll be having that discussion here in the next month or two and decide, okay, these are the places we want to travel to. How much time do we want to allot for that place? And then which weeks do we want to take it? And so we plan it out, have it set, and then we save a handful, like 3 or 4 PTOs, just in case the kids get sick during the winter
Mhm.
time.
Was that the same approach you took when you were single?
Me, yes, because I'm type A and
Yeah.
I very much I like everything laid out. I'm like, if you look at my Google Calendar, it is like managed out to like every 15 minutes. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be eating here. I'm supposed to be driving or traveling to this place. So yes, I'm very regimented and I like scheduling. So yes, that has always been the way I've done it. But I try to allow for some spontaneity here and there. My partner definitely is more spontaneous than I am, and so I welcome that. And that's kind of what has kind of melded into this who I am today. But yes, I've always had that mentality where I try to help others out and try to plan ahead as much as I can.
Yeah,
How about
no,
you?
that makes sense. So
I feel like you're type A too. I mean, if anything, you might be more type A than I am.
I'm pretty type A, but I think that in my life, I found that I enjoy at least when it comes to travel, and been fortunate enough to travel a lot, that for my vacations and my time off is usually associated with a trip of some sort. And I'm very, very spontaneous, and that's why me and my partner get along so well because she's also very spontaneous. So on a weekend, I'll ask my wife, "Hey, should we go someplace this weekend? We have a long weekend. We have a 3-day weekend." And before you know it, we're booking a plane ticket. We're getting a hotel. It might be a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out. For whatever reason, I have a problem with booking vacations 6 months to a year out because I'm always very concerned of, okay, I'm going to book this vacation. What's the unknown that I'm not seeing? What is the work unknown that I'm not seeing? What is my stress level going to be at? What is my friends and my family? What situation are they going to be at? Am I going to get that random invitation for an engagement party or a wedding? Are we going to be pregnant? Are we going to have something that comes up? And I think that's why I like the spontaneity of vacations closer to the present as opposed to trying to plan them out a year or two, or I guess 6 months or a year. However, that might change when we have our child because then at that point, you're actually trying to plan for a family, not just for two adults that can go on a whim.
Right. Right. And actually, so how does that tie into work? Do you feel like that's what's kind of led you to feel the way you feel about the spontaneity, that because you weren't sure what was going to be scheduled for how long out, that's why you feel like you can't make plans that far out?
You know,
Because for medicine, it's different, right? For medicine,
yeah.
when you put in your time, that is like the only time you cannot be called for an emergency. Like you know that you can rely on the company, your staff, and your colleagues to cover for you for that time that you have requested off. So that is like the one time. And that's why I like to plan it out, because then I know that's the time that I can turn everything off and I don't have to worry about anything. But it sounds like that's a little different for you guys.
I've never actually thought about that. And
Yeah.
now that you're actually asking me that question, there's a like I'm having this existential moment right now where maybe that's the reason why I am the way I am. Because if you remember in college, we would plan our trips and we would
Mhm.
know and we would sit down and we would know what day we were leaving. We would know exactly how much everything was going to cost. Because at that point,
Yeah.
we're trying to
How much
budget.
we were going to be driving, who was
Yeah,
driving when. Oh, yeah, I
what car
remember.
we were taking and getting into the firm. I think maybe, and at the time when I was in the firm, I was single, no family, no kids, no wife, none of that. And it was more so like, hey, managing attorney, I want to do this. Do I have the time this weekend? No, you don't have the time this weekend, but you know what? Next weekend, the courts are closed on Monday for a federal holiday, so I can give you a longer time off. Okay, cool. Let me figure out what kind of vacation I can put together or pay time off I can put together. Or not, I guess it's not PTO at that point because it's a weekend, but what kind of time off situation can I put together to either go visit friends or go visit family or just take personal time at home to relax. So that may have been what kind of caused my situation of being more spontaneous because I had to be spontaneous. And she did as well, you know. It was actually we had an issue one day where we were at lunch and she had a medical event. And I obviously don't want to talk about that medical event on here, but she had a medical event in which, you know, she might be out for a few days. And depending on the results, it could be a little bit longer than that. And it was, okay, we had to go back and start making cancellations, whether it be in court, whether it be with clients, because at that time I wasn't experienced enough to take on certain things. However, in the legal community, obviously there's some paths of what we call baby lawyers, you know, not a lawyer who represents a baby, but a new lawyer in the community. As a baby lawyer, you know, there are some individuals that are like, hey, you're a baby lawyer, we got you, you'll learn. But there's other approaches of you are a licensed attorney. You once you got that license, you are able to run a trial in the same manner that you're managing attorney. So you better be prepared and we don't care, you better show up.
Mm.
So I know that she was stressed out because she was about to take time off and it was, well, can Nik handle this? Can he handle this hearing? Can he handle it? And anything, because you remember it's family law. So it's all very, very important for the client. You have kids and money and divorces and everything that's super near and dear to everybody. I mean, in family law, that's some of the most emotional stuff that you can get into. So you want to make sure that it's covered appropriately. So with the time off, I knew that she was in panic mode because it's forced time off for a medical emergency. But she's thinking, okay, I still need to make money. I still need to be there for my clients. I still need to contact all these judges in all these different counties and let them know that I may or may not be able to be there. What does the next couple of weeks look like? And that was always paranoid because for me as the backup associate attorney who's still trying to learn, I'm like, okay, what is it that I need to try to figure out how to do at the last possible second?
Yeah.
So I think to bring it full circle, the spontaneity of it is I never knew what was going to happen. I never knew what, obviously our calendar was there, but hearings come up, mediations come up, new clients come in. I never knew what that was going to look like. So I had to change my approach to be more spontaneous and appreciate that kind of vacation planning and that travel in order to maximize my happiness during those trips, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So I think I know the answer, but it sounds like you guys are allotted a certain amount of hours or a certain amount of time per year. And it's not like the average employer, like working for McDonald's or working for, a grocery store where you have to accrue time, right? So you don't automatically get time off, but you have to work for it before you get it. Obviously, in medicine, we get it ahead of time. What is it? Do you guys get that ahead of time? It sounds like that, but
So every firm is different. Like I said, my firm, I was her first associate attorney. So she was also learning how to be a managing attorney as well as
Mhm.
the owner of her own firm because as the owner of her own firm, she got to call the shots.
Yeah.
And with a firm that small, there's no HR, right? So me not understanding benefits, I mean, I had no benefits at the firm because it was so small. I did not have health insurance. I didn't have
Wow.
dental. I had to go out into the marketplace and get my insurance that way. But neither did she because of how small and how many employees she had.
Mhm.
So if I was to go back and do it all over again, knowing what I know now, I would probably sit down and as I was negotiating salary, I would also say, okay, how does PTO work? How many days could I have every single year? How much time off? How am I going to accrue? How many weeks do I get? Whatever, is important to me. I would have probably negotiated that in my salary discussion with her. That way I could always have something to go back to and say, hey, I know that we're stuck, but you gave me 14 days off. I'm taking a 14-day vacation. This is part of our agreement. And lawyers pretty much always hold themselves to the agreement, right? We're lawyers. And that's, again, that's the nuance of a small firm. As you get into bigger firms, you get into firms that are just in one location with 50 or 60 employees. You get into firms that are all across the state. You get into national firms and you get into international firms. And I think it's just like any corporation, as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, a standard is set and held to make things more consistent. Similar to the health system stuff that we talked about. There's going to be a standard that, hey, everybody here gets this amount, we accrue this amount, we're going to give you these days off, and that's pretty much what it is. So, but I would say if you're going into a discussion with a firm and the PTO is not discussed, you need to have that discussion because it's super, super important. Very, very.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think in law and medicine that holds true. The other little nuance I think for the medical field is that federal holidays, if, for example, if you were supposed to, so I have Wednesdays off. I work 4 days a week. Wednesdays are my days off. However, if a holiday falls within one of my days that I was supposed to be in clinic, so usually holidays fall on a Monday, then it would actually retract. It will take away one of my PTO days, even though I would have rather worked,
Yeah.
for that day, but because no one else is coming in. So that is something else that people have to keep in mind is that most companies will take that additional PTO, even if it's a holiday, if it's a federal holiday that falls within a day that you were supposed to work. But yeah, just a small little nuance that might be important.
Yeah. That's a good thing to note because I've had three separate careers that we've talked about on this podcast where I was at a firm, I was in aerospace and defense in a non-lawyer position, and now I'm my own business owner doing real estate investing. So in that 7-year period that I was at aerospace and defense, it was corporate. So all the holidays were laid out. You accrue time. So we accrued 10 to 13 hours a month, depending on your, position within the company. And they had policies on how many hours were capped out at. So you could, accrue up to 200 or 400 hours. You had a certain amount of hours for sick days, which would expire at the end of every year. I was fortunate enough to be at a company that halfway through, they changed their policy to 4-day work weeks. So we had every Friday off, which was lovely. But then you also had that position to where some holidays we would get off, some holidays we wouldn't. So, for instance, there might be a holiday that the rest of the banks get, but we didn't get because we had Fridays off already established in. So,
Mm,
certain days you look at the calendar and you'd say, well, last year we had a lot more holidays, but because this year certain days fell on certain days, I'm not getting the benefit. So although I left the company, I was talking to some, former colleagues, and I guess this year, we're in 2025. This year, July 4th falls on a Friday. So they're getting no benefit of a day off because the Friday is already a day off.
right, right. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think a more candid conversation is what recent trips have you been on, and where do you usually travel, and what's the longest amount of time you've traveled using PTO since becoming a lawyer?
So again, spontaneity, right? I would say that my trips have always been most of the time quick trips where I'm looking at 3, 4, maybe 5 days, usually utilizing a weekend so I can maximize my time. Because I think that's important for a lot of individuals is the travel hacking aspect. How do you hack your vacation days to get the max amount of days off in a row? Because you look at the calendar and you say, I would love to take 5 days off, but where are 5 days off that I can take it? Well, if you look at a Saturday, a Sunday, and then Memorial Day, and you mix it in with a company that has every Friday off, that's 4 days off that I don't necessarily have to take out of my PTO. I can just use it for what it is and save my PTO time for when I actually want to take it, maybe around the holiday season. But I would say most of the time I would take 3 to 4 days and we would travel throughout the United States. So we would go to one of our favorite spots is New Orleans,
Gonna
and
say
it's within
you basically have a second house there.
basically, right? It's an 8 hour drive from where we're located, so that's an easy weekend trip, to leave on a Thursday or Friday and drive back on a Monday. No airfare, and we actually enjoy driving. Vegas is always a good trip. We still have family in Chicago, so we would travel to Chicago. We would travel to take short trips down to Austin or go up to Oklahoma because there's some nice cabins in an area called Broken Bow up there. But there were some instances in which I would take longer time. So at the company I worked for last, I got to travel, do a lot of international travel, given my position there. And there was one instance in which I had to travel overseas, and I actually had to go to the Netherlands. And the company, they were awesome in this manner where they would pay for your plane ticket, but as long as the return ticket was the same cost or less than what the, normal return ticket would be, then they would allow you to stay longer. So I actually went to the Netherlands and then I ended up staying a week longer and I went to Germany. Uh, and the ticket to return from Germany was actually cheaper than the ticket to return from Netherlands. So I actually saved the company money by staying out there. I got to use PTO. I put my notice in 2 or 3 weeks in advance, and my manager was okay with it. So I had about a week long trip in Germany. The travel was paid for by the company, which was also excellent, right? I had to obviously pay for my own hotel and my own food, but the plane ticket, which is when you're traveling overseas, the biggest cost, that was covered. And now as a business owner, I don't think I really get any days off because it's every day there's something to do. So although I could take a vacation, we don't really take vacations anymore because we're always doing something, whether it's real estate or my wife's vintage t-shirt company or us doing the podcast. There's always something to do. But yeah, so there's been some international travel come on the heels of work travel, a lot of 3 day weekends. And that's all I need. Personally, a good 3 day weekend away is enough. If I start sitting there for a 2 week vacation, I get kind of stir crazy. Like I want to get back to it. Uh,
Yeah.
but that's a great question. What about you? What is you're planning so far ahead, you have to make sure that like those vacation days are golden. So what vacations are you planning out?
Yeah, so we are the opposite. We like to plan ahead, and we usually try to do longer trips than rather than short weekend trips, right? Um, If we do weekend trips, it's usually local. It's things that we can drive to. But for example, this year I did a conference in Palm Springs, and so similar to you, my company will pay for the travel, the hotel. There's a limit of how much I can use. And so buying tickets, getting the hotel, that's all on the company. But then what we did is we went a couple days early, stayed in LA because I have family in LA, visited family for a couple days, and then drove out to the conference and stayed there.
Yep.
So usually our conferences are in pretty big cities. Orlando is usually a common one, Austin, Nashville, LA, those are all
A lot of
common
fun
places that these
places.
big conferences go to. Yeah. But last year we did a 2 week travel to Hawaii. We did it adults only at that time. So what I did is we flew our kids down to my parents in Texas, dropped them off, and they stayed with them for 2 weeks while we flew over to Hawaii. That was actually the exact same time that Maui ended up catching on fire.
Wow.
Yeah, we spent that first week in Oahu, um, on Waikiki, and then the plan was to do the second week in Maui and travel there. But of course that got changed. And 2 weeks on Oahu was way too much. If anyone ever asked, I think 1 week was plenty because we got to do everything that we wanted to do and lay on the beach and relax. But then the second week we were bored. Like we had no idea what to do, but also we were spending so much money on food and all the events. So, but later this year, I mean, we are, what's the plan here? We are going to go do our first international trip with the kids. So we're going to be going to Canada, the BC area. We're going to go out there, and we have an Airbnb that we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing about 5 to 6 days out there. In 2 weeks, I'll be doing a festival in Portland. So Beyond Wonderland Festival. So that I'm excited for that. My spouse and I, we have agreed that every single year we each will have our individual solo travel, just so that we can continue to be ourselves and not feel like we're always connected at the hip, and that we're not defined by each other or defined by our kids. And so that's always been a priority for us, is that every year we each get to travel.
Yeah.
They got to travel to Vegas a month ago, and so I now get to travel to Portland and do the festival. Um, what else? Oh, the other big trip is we're going to Hawaii as a family this year.
Yeah.
Not adults only, but as a family. And we're going to go with some of our close friends who also have kids. And we're going to spend a week there. So again, most of our trips are longer than 5 days, intentionally, because especially when you're traveling with kids, it takes 24 to 48 hours to really get used to the new area, the time zone, and the kids to settle down. So you don't want to get there and then all of a sudden have to turn around and fly back already.
Yeah, it's funny because we went to Orlando a few years ago and we went to not Islands of Adventure, but Universal Studios, and we went to Hollywood Studios. And when me and my spouse were walking around, we saw the kids and we said, thank the Lord that we don't have kids right now, because the way we can move and navigate and just switch on a dime was so convenient for navigating such a busy park
Yeah.
where a ride might be canceled and we might say, all right, let's just hurry up and go over there. And you look around at all the other parents and like, they got to get the stroller and then they got to get the kid their food or whatever it was. And so now I think our approach to planning vacations, we're expecting in November, so that's going to be completely different. But, over the last year, we actually got married. Our 1 year is coming up. And so that was kind of our big vacation last year is we actually got married in the Bahamas. It was a quasi elopement. It was just us going down there. We had some family members down there. But again, even for that trip, I utilized, because I was still at the company, I utilized the weekend days to compensate for vacation days. So I took, I think we were there for a week, but I utilized 2 or 3 days of weekend time, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, so I didn't have to use PTO, and then I use the rest as PTO. But it's the strategy behind travel and the strategy behind getting those days off and making sure it's worth it. I think that in any career, as cliche as it sounds, like mental health is important and the burnout can be real. And especially if you're in a position where you might be working from home or you might be in the office or you might be working long hours or you might be away from your family and friends, like that burnout can sneak up on you. So it's always super important. Just make sure you're getting that time off, making sure you're taking the trip because work's always going to be there. Like that was our favorite quote, like the work when you come there Monday is always going to be there. For you, it might be a little different because your patients are super important. Like you're dealing with some life and death stuff, but in a corporate setting, the work will always be there.
Yeah. No, but similarly, I mean, work-life balance is very important. I mean, a lot of I am sure there's a survey. I know that there's a survey out there. I don't have the details, but the amount of burnout within physicians across specialties is quite high. It's definitely higher than 50%, and it's only growing. So it's unfortunate, but I'm one of the lucky fews who really enjoys being a doctor and enjoys going to see patients most days. And that's why my first 2 years out of residency, when I had no kids, and I was really focused on paying down student debt, I actually didn't take very much time off. In fact, I took time off to go moonlight, basically work a second job, because I was so focused on paying down the debt. I think those first 2 years, if we average it out, I probably worked 80 hours every single week for those
Oh,
straight, like literally every single week for 2 years. But that was my goal. That was our goal. And it got us to where we were financially stable, got rid of our student debt. And so it was really important to us. And I didn't burn out at all, but it's because I feel like I chose a job that I really enjoyed, and I did what I really enjoyed. So it's really important that whatever career you choose, whether lawyer, medical field, any other field, that you truly enjoy it and it's not for the money.
mm. Yeah. Because that's still that's a cliche nowadays. You know, I think my mom says to me, if you find a job that you love and a passion, you'll never work a day in your life.
Exactly.
And I mean, that's the beauty of finding that career that you
Right.
really, really love. And you don't have to find that career fast. You can fall into it eventually.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like people who go into law and medicine are usually type A, and they
Yeah.
have big plans and then things that have been set out. And it's okay to deviate from the plan. Sometimes it's nice to deviate, and find a new path. And it's not a failure on anyone's part. It's sometimes it's necessary to find yourself and find your true happiness. And I think we see that in especially in your story, Nick, and how you've changed, over the couple of years. Your career path has definitely probably not where you thought you would be when we
Not
were
at all.
graduating college versus where it is now. So it's important to be able to deviate like that. Um,
Yeah, you got to find your own happiness.
right,
That's a good one, Long. You got to find your own happiness.
right. Yeah. Any cool trips that we did back in college that we wish we could do now? I feel like we didn't travel too much. I mean, we did that one big Vegas trip.
The big Vegas
As
trip. I
Yeah,
think that, and for those of you listening, our big Vegas trip was, we were broke college students. We were on a budget. We carpooled, and from Austin to Las Vegas, it was I think 19 hours. I think we calculated, and there were four of us in the back of our buddy's Ford Focus. Like that.
yeah.
That's what we drove out there. And I remember his girlfriend at the time made us all snack packs and Ziploc bags. But we were so on a budget. We stayed
Right.
at the Imperial Palace, which
Which
is
is no longer there.
it's the
But it,
lake. So
oh,
the
is it?
room
Yeah, because
what
now
the
it's like in
Imperial
the back.
Palace
Like
was,
yeah,
yeah.
it's just so funny how things have changed. But
We
yeah,
there were four of us. We shared a room with two queen beds, and we were and that at that time Vegas was still a little cheaper than it is now. Um, but we were the guys at the slot machines playing penny slots, hoping that the bartender would come around and give us our free drink because we just
right.
couldn't afford a lot.
Right. And it's funny how that still bleeds into today, though. I mean, I'm still quite frugal.
Yeah,
Obviously, you're still looking for deals and
yeah.
things when you travel. So same idea. We want to maximize. You don't want to be wasting money where you don't want to,
Mhm.
either, even if you're making a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
And it's wild too because I was a manager, so I had a team of, 10 to 15 people over the course of 2 years. And my team, I would have individuals that were coming fresh out of college. And it was one of those things where if I had the knowledge that they had, they're planning trips to Coachella, Lollapalooza, they're taking these international trips. When we were that age, I didn't even know those things existed.
right.
I mean, you said you're going to Beyond Wonderland. Like on my bucket list is to go to EDC in Las Vegas. And I just came to that realization that was a thing maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah,
But
dude, we need to plan that for next year.
that would be very
Legit.
fun. That would be extremely fun. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's just the knowledge that
Right.
kids these days have of
Yeah.
all the cool trips and how to navigate that. So
Right. Yeah, and you're going to be coming up with a big change in your life here in November, and I think that's going to change your outlook and your planning as well with the kid. And in fact, you probably won't be traveling for 6 or 7 months, so you better get the travel bug
get it
out of
out
the
now.
way now before our baby comes.
Yep. What do they
Uh,
call it? A baby moon? Is that what?
yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, Long, this was a great conversation about vacation time and PTO. With all of these topics, we can go in for hours and just keep going. And I think that's the beauty of these discussions is that they all kind of intertwine. Today we talked about some PTO and it kind of mixes in with our other podcasts with contracts and negotiating your PTO time. But any final words for our listeners? Any words of wisdom?
No, obviously negotiate, know how much time you can take off. I personally, my motto is you use all your PTO every single year.
Yes.
I mean, it's there for a reason, so use it. Um, but yeah, you got to find that work-life balance because it's a marathon. You got to make sure that whatever you're doing, you can do for a really long time. So
Yes, I completely agree with you. So,
yeah.
well, that's it for this episode of the Medical Legal Brief, where medicine meets law. If you like what you heard, share it, rate it, and give us a follow. We do these podcasts all the time, so let us know what you want to hear on the next podcast here with Dr. Long and Lawyer Nick.
Yes, we're doctors. Yes, we're lawyers. No, this podcast is not medical or legal advice. Do not take anything we say as a reason to perform your own heart surgery, represent yourself in court, or diagnose your neighbor's rash. This is for entertainment only. Think of it like hanging out with your smartest, wittiest friends, not a substitute for an actual appointment. If you act on anything we say without talking to your own professional, that's on you. Seriously, don't do that.